Charlie Griffiths of Haken is back with his second solo album, this one entitled Gods of Pangaea. So, can we count on more progressive metal goodness like his debut, or will he become another victim to the sophomore slump? Can he hit us with more paleologically oriented social commentary laced with $5 science words? Or will he just beat us into submission with tectonically crunchy metal riffs? Well, you're about to find out. Hey, Prog Noggins, welcome back to Bleeding Edge. I am Dave. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate it. So, this week I'm talking to you about Gods of Pangaea from Tiktaalika. Yes, I know. I said Charlie Griffiths in the intro, but officially he has taken on the title of the first album as the name of his project now. So it's kind of a band. I'm guessing he loved the name Tiktaalika so much, and he wants to make sure he keeps it front and center going forward, which is basically encouraging because that means I think he expects there to be more down the road. But right now, we're going to focus on this album right now, Gods of Pangaea. Along for the ride is his crew, and it's a small crew because it's Charlie with all the guitars. It is Darby Todd, quickly becoming the new Mike Portnoy of the prog and metal world, on drums, of course, and Connor Green, Charlie's bandmate from Haken, joining him on bass. Along with the three instrumentalists, of course, we need vocals, because this is not an instrumental album, as you maybe might have thought it would be. The last one was not. This one is not either. We have Tommy Rogers of Between the Buried and Me, Daniel DeJong, I hope I pronounced that correctly, of Textures, Roddy Walker of Protest the Hero, and Vladimir Lalik of Organized Chaos. So these four gentlemen come along for the ride. Handling production duties, of course, are Charlie, with a lot of mixing help from Adam Nolly Getgood, their buddy from Haken, and who gets around and does all kinds of stuff and works with a lot of different people. So we got a pretty solid group of people involved with the making of this album. It's got 7 songs, a runtime of a brisk 45 minutes for the official album, though the addition of a 7+ minute bonus instrumental really makes it more like about 52 minutes. And a quick brief notes before we start breaking it down. So this one picks up a bit from the first album, though leaning a little bit more, at least, into his 80s thrash and new wave of British heavy metal influences. So we're thinking, Iron Maiden, Metallica, Ozzy, Merciful Fate. Although I'm going to admit, I feel like in the middle of the album there, I did hear a bit that reminded me of Gojira, just a little bit. For the most part, that doesn't happen a lot. This one's less of a concept album this time around than the last one was, but it still continues with the prehistory narrative a bit from the first album, picking up a little bit further down the road with a bit of fictional dark mysticism involved. We'll talk about that a little bit more down the road here. And, of course, in keeping with the time period style-wise reflected, they kept the production shine to a minimum, really. Kept all the grit, all the rough edges are intact there, just like you were listening to, Master of Puppets or something like that. So definite early, mid-'80s rough edge metal feel to it. Trust me, I was there, although I didn't necessarily listen to all of that stuff, but it definitely has that sound to it. So they did a good job of replicating that. So anyway, now before I start to break it down, a quick reminder, if you could, please hit that subscribe button so you can follow along on my adventures in the progosphere. And if you like this review, well, okay, you know what to do. I'd appreciate it. Thank you. All right, reminder, I score everything on 4 categories: intellectual, innovation, technical, and emotional. Plus, depending on how all of that totals up, I might add in an enjoyment modifier if the raw score just doesn't seem to accurately reflect how I felt about the album. All right, so digging into it, we start off, of course, with intellectual. So if you were to give just this album a cursory listen, maybe without having familiarity with Charlie's solo debut, also called Tiktaalika, you might not be so quick to recognize the depth in most of these lyrics and the concepts behind them. Charlie keeps it pretty straightforward. He's definitely going for that 80s vibe, a little bit over the top with the fantasy / mystical / slightly satanic edge that, oftentimes accompanied metal back at the time, especially if you were listening to things like Iron Maiden and Saxon and all that. So he's got that vibe going, but it might be easy to miss it because the lyrics to an extent are kind of literary in a certain way, and they allude to things that might have happened in this Hyperborean stories like Conan. I think I get that word right, Hyperborean. I always forget. But there's a lot going on there besides the geological and paleontological, there we go, references within the storyline, and talking about dark prehistoric cults, mentions of dinosaurs, a lot of those time period category words that they throw in there, Mesozoic and Cambrian and Precambrian. Charlie knows his stuff when it comes to that, and especially there was many layers of that. No pun intended when you talk about that kind of archaeology and layers of sediment. Charlie knew a lot about that last album, and he's also, in the midst of this, got a lot to say about modern society and human relations, and he mixes in a personal note or two with the lyrics. So if you've never heard him explain, again, the layers of meaning and all the depth of meaning in his debut, go find my interview from 2023 with him when he talks about the album. It is mind-blowing. Absolutely all the thinking that went into the various meanings of that album. In fact, I will try to make sure I remember to put a link to that interview in the description so you can find it really easily. I'm certain in the end of it, I didn't catch every reference to modern concerns contained within the lyrics. There's a bit of allegory in there and all that. And at the same time, I feel confident they're there based on what I know of Charlie. It's a safe assumption. So, scoring the intellectual side of things, I'm giving him a solid 5 here. This is Charlie. Least he could have scored as a 4, but I know because I don't think I caught everything that's there, and I know there's more going on than might seem on the surface level. I round it up. Let's be honest. I'll die on that hill. I'm comfortable with that. All right, talking about the innovation component. So, a bit of a conundrum. How does one score an album that is intentionally meant to be a throwback? It's not meant to advance into new territory per se. It's not meant to expand the genre. As a matter of fact, it's meant to be something that almost is a time capsule in some ways. Like he went back in time and recorded this album in 1984, and then came back and shared it with us now. There's plenty of proggy goodness in this one, with all kinds of changes throughout the songs, whether we're talking time signature or tempo or textures or mood or style or whatever. All the prog stylings that you might expect from a Haken album are in fact there. And at the same time, it's all steeped in 80s flavored metal, including all the harder and darker elements of the time. I'm not talking about the pop-oriented stuff like Def Leppard or Motley Crue or Poison. This is the music meant for serious aficionados of the genre who sat at the metalheads table during lunch wearing their concert shirts. You know, the black ones with the white sleeves, a la the 80s. Absolutely what we're talking about here. This is music for distracting demonic devil bats in the Upside Down so the other kids can defeat Vecna. There you go. There's a reference for you. Go look it up if you don't know what I'm talking about. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, shame on you. As noted, he is absolutely fully dedicated to that motif, all the way down to the gritty production, the full-on 80s guitar tuning and processing that I'm hearing, blistering solos steeped squarely in blues-based metal with nary a reference to more modern techniques or anything like that you might expect these days. The album cover itself is dipping really all 10 toes into the themes of satanic panic to boot. Dan Goldworthy, once again, doing the honors in the style he actually built his reputation on before getting involved with Charlie and then later Haken's last album. So Dan is a absolutely versatile dude, but he built his reputation on death metal and heavy metal. and he brings all that to bear in this album cover. So Charlie went all out in terms of resurrecting 80s thrash and a new wave of British heavy metal music right here in this one. Ultimately, if you listen to these two albums back to back, Tiktaalika is the one that is pretty clearly modern prog metal, with all kinds of nice little things blended in, and a dose of thrash elements, because that is Charlie's original inspiration as a guitarist. But this is Charlie fully committing to the thrash genre and just bathing in it. It's a very different sound from the last album, although those prog elements are still there. Really, to me, the only kind of anachronism, and by anachronism, I mean something that really didn't fit with the 80s milieu, if I can throw some French in there before I go to Paris in a month, the metal vibe is the reliance on harsh vocals throughout the album. There's a lot of that. Probably about 60, 40, 70, 30 in favor of harsh versus clean vocals, I think. At least, to be honest, to my memory and my ear, what I'm hearing on this is more of a modern affectation and not something you really heard in 80s metal. Now, let's be honest. I will admit my knowledge overall of thrash and the harder elements of 80s metal is pretty light. I know a good bit about Metallica from the time. I know a little bit of Megadeth from the time and a little bit of Anthrax. Nothing really much at all, especially from the time of Slayer. I've heard some Slayer since then, but I really can't say I've paid that close attention. It's not my gig, so I don't know. So I could be wrong about the vocals, and maybe that kind of thing was a little bit more present in early, mid-'80s metal. I'm certain some of it started to come about with the birth of death metal towards the end of the 80s and the very beginning of the 90s. I will tell you here and now, it is amazing. I wish I could go back in time and find my college radio buddies from 1991 and tell them that, hey, this Cannibal Corpse thing is not just some one-off or short-lived, I'll get these words out right, short-lived novelty act. You go forward 30 years and they're fucking revered. Yeah, who would have thought back then? Never knew it. Anyway, I digress. So anyway, with Charlie and company stretching well outside the boundaries of his work with Haken, and even more so outside the previous album, I got to give this one a 4 for innovation. Like Charlie is taking himself in new directions, even though the new direction isn't technically a new direction in the world of prog or metal or rock. It's him doing something different. So I give him credit for stretching things a bit and really fully committing. He indeed committed with a lot of T's on that one. And that is a deep cut reference. If anybody can get that one, I'll be impressed. All right. On the technical side of things. So with all of the prog and metal guitarists out there right about now who get so much attention, I got to say, as far as I'm concerned, especially listening to this, Charlie is criminally overlooked. He is criminally given less attention than he deserves. He knocks this out of the park. And absolutely making a statement that he can shred with all the titans of thrash. He's off the charts here. Honest to God, if he went back in time to 84 with this album, he would likely have ended up as revered as the greats of the time, maybe even more so. The fact that he impresses so much, even while limiting himself to the sounds and techniques of that time period, says so much, because we all know from his work with Haken that Charlie's got a big palate when it comes to playing guitar. The man can do a lot of different things and pretty much can do anything you ask of him. And he just absolutely impressed the hell out of me with this. Meanwhile, Darby Todd is quickly filling the hole of ubiquity left behind when Mike Portnoy rejoined Dream Theater. And he's living up to his own lofty standards. There's a reason that he plays with guys like Charlie and Devin Townsend. And I know he's involved in something else right now, Car Mechanic, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. That's off the top of my head here, and I didn't look it up before I started this. But he's absolutely living up to his lofty standards. And Connor Green, bit of a revelation, because really you only know Connor, at least I only know Connor from his work with Haken, and he's no slouch with that. But the dude basically stepped into this role and channeled Cliff Burton in the way he plays his bass as a counterpoint to Charlie's melodies, primary melodies in the guitar. Charlie wrote the drum and bass parts and kind of programmed them and sent them over to Darby and Connor, but Darby and Connor were free to change things up, shift things, and man, dude came back and absolutely, this is, I think, one of the reasons that this album is so successful, resurrecting the sounds of early mid-'80s, especially if you talk about stuff like Metallica. And the guest vocalists, to a man, held nothing back. The vocals are intense, they're emotional, they're in your face, and they are exactly what I think Charlie was looking for, and then some. I know he was very, very pleased with how all this turned out. So, I mean, everybody brought their A game to this album, which is impressive, really. You would be very much hard-pressed to find a more kick-ass overall metal performance this year. I haven't had my ear to the ground for all the stuff metal, and so this one's a little bit oddly out of my normal playground. But I got to say, this has got to rank up there towards the top. To give this one a 5 for technical. All right, talking about emotional. Fearing of becoming a broken record, if you watch some of the other reviews and the emotional thing, this is always kind of one of those spots for me where I don't know if I've been tough grading people or it's just me. I don't know. I have said before, maybe I'm dead inside. I don't know. But I think opinions will vary widely on this one if you're looking at it the way I do. Let's be honest, there's a lot of intellectual stuff going on in the lyrics and a lot of high-level technicality going on in the music. But, as far as the lyrics between the allegory and the creative storytelling and all that, that's not the emotional stuff being brought unless it's hitting some sort of chord with you. The performances for everybody involved are definitely passionate. They brought some of their own emotion to this. Just for me, unfortunately, not a lot of it was there to grab onto me for an emotional standpoint. I don't know. Maybe if I had a greater sense of nostalgia for 80s metal, but I really don't. Maybe if the vocals were more melodic, they're not especially, except for some bursts of clean vocals among the harsh ones here and there. And actually, those usually are my favorite parts of the songs. Just nothing that really got me. Nothing that grabbed me anywhere here that brought an emotional response to it. I can appreciate everything that's going on there. Just doesn't evoke the emotional part for me. Like I said, in the end, I appreciate the album for what it is, and how committed everybody was to bringing the 80s back in this sense. But as has been a common year for me thus far into the year, or a common theme for me this far into the year, I don't dislike it at all, but I have to rate it a 3 on the emotional part. All right. So in the meanwhile, so review all this. We got intellectual 5, innovation 4, technical 5, emotional 3. Do it all together, do the math, get the average, you get a 4.25. That's the highest raw score I've given anybody this year, to be honest. And at the same time, I recognize in the end, overall, the album has a lot to impress, but it's just, unfortunately, not a style of metal that has ever especially appealed to me. If you love early thrash and would enjoy a progressive twist to that, you're going to probably love this album. If you like your prog metal to be on the heavier side with more harsh vocals and more crunchy riffs, this is going to be up your alley. For me, I was never a lover of thrash, unfortunately, and the skewed tendency of the vocals towards harsh more than clean does take away from my overall personal enjoyment of the album. The musicianship throughout is absolutely fantastic, but in the end, I'm going to have to deduct a negative 0.5 on the enjoyment modifier from the album. That's going to give it an overall final score for me of 3.75. Still one of the highest rated albums I've had this year. Not the top, though, but I just wish I enjoyed the thrash elements a little bit more. I wish that was more my thing, but it's really not. It's never been. So I know probably some out there are going, heretic, bastard, you have no taste. Okay, fair enough, whatever. I just never liked it that much. All right, final thoughts on this. Meanwhile, standout track for me, it was less about tracks overall than portions of tracks. That when the vocals were melodic, they were often really quite good, and I quite enjoyed the parts written for them. And a lot of times those passages were perhaps a little more melodic, a little slower. Not that I didn't enjoy all the crunchiness throughout. I did enjoy the rest of the album as a musical whole for the most part. But for me, the title track really was the one that stood out the most. Got an earworm of a chorus. It really sticks with you. And that's the song I thought was most memorable. Although, again, on a musical sense, I enjoyed a lot of it. Meanwhile, this here, to me, is another example and more evidence of why I think Haken is such a unique and consistently engaging band. That they bring such diverse sensibilities to the table when they get together to make music, whether it's Ross's pop leanings, and you can hear those in his solo album, and his work with DiVirgilio, Morse, and Jennings, or Rich's jazz fusion tastes on his recent solo EPs that he's been putting out. And I'm blanking on the title of them right now. I want to say Yin and Yang or something like that. Or, again, here's Charlie with his driving metal and his thrash background. You put all that stuff together, and Lord only knows, I'm not entirely sure what other predilections that Ray Hearn and Connor Green have for themselves. But man, you put all that together and you balance it out nicely, you get stuff like what Haken is putting out. So that just shows it to me. Like that's one of the reasons they are such a fantastic band. And like your basic prog album, you get a lot of nice new vocabulary words in this one. Some of them even getting up to 5 and 6 syllables. You might be Googling a lot, depending on who you are when you get into this, when you start reading the words. My favorite vocabulary word from this one is Chicxulub. And I may or may not be pronouncing that incredibly well. Definitely had to look that up. I wasn't sure if it's some sort of made-up name, some sort of cousin of Cthulhu or something like that. Turns out it's a meteor crater discovered under the Yucatan Peninsula. And it's the one that they believe when it hit, it was like a 10-mile wide asteroid. The devastation and the climate disruption that resulted from that impact was believed to be the primary cause of the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction event. This was a mass extinction of 75% of plant and animal species on the planet, including all non-avian dinosaurs. So in other words, Chicxulub or whatever it is what killed the dinosaurs. So this, again, sure, Charlie is a studied man. He knows his stuff. Anyway, so the album itself is out Friday, March 14th. I included a link if you want to go ahead and pre-order that. If you're salivating over it, if you've been listening to the singles and you like those, you're probably going to love this album as a whole. Meanwhile, coming next week, I'm going to be reviewing the other most anticipated album of the year, at least so far, as Steven Wilson returns to progressive rock with The Overview. Very excited about that. Disappointed I couldn't get a pre-release copy. Oh well, I'm only a little guy after all. All right, I leave you with the usual reminder to never fear to deviate from the norm. Until next time, keep it proggy.